Hello, fam. Welcome back to Radiant Living, the space where we get real about purpose, faith, healing from fully from the inside out. I'm so excited about today's guest. If you've ever been moved by a song that felt like it was written just for you, chances are you've heard it and it was one of hers. Kambua is not just a powerhouse vocalist, she's a storyteller, she's a truth teller, and a woman who carries grace and grit in equal measure. She's lit up our screens and playlists for years, and through our music and her ministry, she's helped so many people reconnect with God, with themselves, and with hope. I remember listening to Kambua sing, at our church many years ago, and just being blown away by just not just her skill set, but just the anointing on her voice. But today we're going to go deeper. We're talking about what it means to hold joy and grief in the same hand, and about losing and still choosing to live, about the silence around infant loss, especially in our African cultures, and how breaking that silence can bring healing to others. So this isn't just a conversation, it's a very vulnerable area. It's heart opening. So if you are walking through something hard or you just need a dose of inspiration, I encourage you to lean in. Kambua, thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor to share this space with you.
Thank you,
Uh,
Tara. Thank you so much for having me.
and I wanted to say thank you for showing up with vulnerability and with strength because I know the story is something that is very dear to you and very personal. So I really appreciate you choosing to share it. So I wanted to go back to like let's start off with your son. I know that you had a stillbirth. Your son had passed away shortly after birth. This was a number of years ago. And if you think back to the version of yourself in the days after your son passed, what do you wish somebody had said to you to help you get through those days of grief?
I think I wish in that moment, I wish somebody had said to me that it's going to be okay, maybe not now. Because I now was grappling with wanting to literally survive what this storm was, but not knowing how long it was going to take for me to be in that place, or if that thing, that heaviness, that darkness would ever lift. I did have amazing, amazing support. The only thing is, you get a lot of support from people who have not walked the journey. So they are there, but they may not necessarily know exactly what to say to you. And I'm grateful, the gift of presence is greatly underrated. My family and friends who were there, it meant everything for me. They gave me the lifeline that I needed. It was a constant reminder that I need to fight for my life. Having my son Nathaniel, because I have my son at the time was 2 years old. Looking at him, I also, I kept thinking, I have to survive this. I don't know how, but I have to survive this because he has no idea what's going on and he needs his mama. And I just think of sometimes some of the things we go through as women are just so heavy. On the one hand, your world is falling apart. On the other hand, you're still expected to show up fully as a mom, as a wife, as as so many other things. So I think for me in that moment, I'd have just wanted to know that it will be okay, maybe not now. Yeah.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Because in my that what I the work that I do in Sierra Leone, and so I've interacted with many women who just in those fresh days after losing a child, and it's complex too because there's also the physical part of the recovery, right? Like you've just giving birth, like you've just given birth, and so there's the complexity is all the things that are going on in your body, but yet you don't have a baby to hold, and there's a lot of yeah. Can you kind of chat more about that?
It was for me, the physical struggle was, it was nothing like I expected. As you've said, my body, I had, my son was born. He stayed with us for 2 days before he passed. My body was ready to take care of a baby. I was ready to breastfeed, and so when there's no baby, where does the milk go? How do you tell your body stop producing milk? There's no baby. Um, it was so difficult trying to heal from a C-section without a baby. When I had my first C-section, I knew that I was going through this because I had the evidence. Nathaniel was there. I had him. I could look at him and see that, okay, I'm in a lot of pain. This is so uncomfortable, but this is what I got out of it. Not having Malachi was so traumatic because I had, I have a wound. My boobs are leaking. They're hurting. We're trying to stop the milk and all of that. And it was so much on my mind. Even the, how you have the postpartum body, postpartum belly. And I just kept thinking, this is so frustrating because people who don't know my story will probably look at me and think I'm either pregnant or I've just had a baby. And how do you stop the people from saying congratulations or asking questions? And so, I'm like, I can't fit in my clothes because obviously my body has changed, but I don't have a reason to show for why I cannot fit into my clothes. It was so much on my mind, that I had to reach out. Thankfully I remember one of my friends who had gone through infant loss, and I kept asking her these questions. you know what do I do? Did you struggle with this? Did you struggle with your self image? Because my self esteem just tanked, because child loss, infant loss, miscarriage, stillbirths, all of that, they come with so much shame, even though it's not something that I could have prevented. I think the first thing that we do as women is look inward, where, my questions were, how could I felt like my body had failed me or had failed my child. So just dealing with all that, dealing with the shame, dealing with feelings of anger, having 110 questions, and then having to contend with my body, acting as though there was a baby and there wasn't a baby. That was extremely, extremely difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When I've witnessed this in Sierra Leone, and I think this is quite common in a lot of African communities, there's a lot of silence around it, and it's often hidden. I spoke to a few women in Sierra Leone who've lost, their baby. Like it has, Sierra Leone has one of the highest rates of infant mortality in the world. And
Hmm.
sometimes to help the mother, they take the baby away really quickly. They don't talk about it. They just want her to move on really quick. And I think this is prevalent in a lot of African cultures, like in terms of
Right.
maybe thinking that it's out of sight, so it's out of mind, and you're going to forget it and move on. What has your journey? How was your experience around this? Because you also experienced this loss in Kenya, in an African setting. And what has that journey taught you about the emotional and spiritual cost of silence? Yeah.
Yeah, Africa unfortunately has a culture of silence with a lot of things that are too heavy to deal with. There's a lot of taboo and stigma surrounding things like death. We're not comfortable with talking about death and loss. And so people who have to grieve most of the times go through such a lonely journey because you're not supposed to talk about it. So in Kenya, having lost my son, what my experience was different in the sense that our hospitals will tell you, we'll give you an option. They will tell you, do you want us to take care of the baby or would you like to bury the baby? And for us, as a family, we decided to bury Malachi. And I'm grateful that we did because I now have a place where I know this is where we laid my son to rest. I can take my flowers, etc. So I'm grateful that that was in place. However, after following all of that, and this was like in the middle of COVID, so people were isolating. You couldn't really see. We were in bubbles, what I know I experienced was, apart from, my friends, people my age, young mothers, people who get it, like people like you and I, the older generation did not really want to talk about, people did not want to talk about it. And there was a lot of, it's going to be fine. You need to get up now. You need to, we need to forget about the things that have happened. We need to focus on what's ahead. And I'm like, I don't want to forget about what has happened because that was my child and that was a child that I wanted. And I had dreams and I had so many plans for him. You can't just tell me to forget about it like it didn't happen. Yes, and not wanting to do that, and I've heard it said even to people very close to me who have walked similar journey. I've heard it said, hurry up and get another one so you can forget about that one. And for me, the thing was, I cannot, nothing and no other baby can replace Malachi. I do hope that I will have other children, but even when I do, they cannot replace, no child can replace another. And so for me, that there was such a huge struggle. It was me fighting that whole system and saying, no, this was my child. I wanted him. He matters. I want to remember him. I want, when I have more children, I want my children to know that he was here. He lived for a short time, but he was here. I want him to have a tombstone. I want something written on it that he was born on this day and he died on this day. I want him to matter. And I think preserving that memory and for the people who are close to me who understood that played such a huge part in my healing, because I felt that he didn't only matter to me, he mattered to my community. Now, moving forward and coming out of all of that, because I work with a lot of women who are on a similar journey. The thing that we keep saying is we cannot act as though those children were never here. We cannot
Right.
act as though we were never pregnant.
That's right.
And we're going to fight that culture of silence because their lives mattered. And when we acknowledge that their lives mattered, it starts our healing in our minds and our spirits. So because, Tara, I've met women who are in their 50s who will say to me, I listened to your story and I finally have been able to talk about the fact that I had a miscarriage when I was 20 something years old, because at the time nobody would have allowed them to talk about it. It's so much hush hush when it comes to things like that. Many of us will look back at our parents and our families and we're like, there are gaps somewhere that we cannot account for. And on my part, I remember after I started having, because I'd had a miscarriage before, when I started experiencing loss is when my mom had a very honest conversation with me about her own losses. I didn't know
Wow.
that
Yeah.
because they were not allowed to talk about it. It
Right.
was, you deal with it. It's you and your husband deal with it, or you and your partner deal with it. And it's just so much that it's so much that weighs on women because the trauma just keeps building and piling up. So I mean, the culture of silence is something that I know needs to change in Africa, and I'm sure in some other parts of the world, but I can speak of my continent because I'm here. I see it and I see what it does to people, to women especially. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that too in Sierra Leone where I remember one time I had a hairdresser. She was, doing my hair, and I had just seen her a few months before, and she was pregnant. And so when I saw her again, I said, "Oh, how's your baby?" And he's like, "Oh, well, he's no more." And I said, "Well, what happened?" And and then she kind of told me, but she brushed it off. And I had to stop and look at her, and she said, "Well, I said, did they tell you what happened?" And she said, "No, they just took the baby away. They just took the child away when." He was no more after I gave birth to him. And I could see she was coming to tears, and I could see that she hadn't had a chance yet to really talk about it or to grieve it because nobody talks about it. It was more, hush hush, get her away and help her heal, but not emotionally, not expressing that. And so, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
sharing your story, especially in an African setting, I think it really gives legitimacy to a lot of women to also explore their grief and to get healing in those places. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that when we go through grief, when we go through loss, you feel so isolated. It almost feels you feel like that you're the only one going through it. But when you hear somebody else talk about it, you realize, oh my goodness, I'm not the only one. And when you hear that other women have walked the path and have come out on the other side, then it gives you hope in that moment. my talking about it is me hoping to give another woman a lifeline for her to know that yes, it's traumatic. It's the worst thing that could possibly happen to you is losing a child, but you can and you will get out of it.
Out of
You
it.
won't die in that pain. You know, and sharing our stories, but in sharing our stories we validate one another's pain.
That's right.
We're able to say what other people are not saying to you, that yes, this mattered, yes, this matters, this is important, yes, this has affected you, how can we heal, what tools do we need, what do we need to get to therapy, do we need to talk to what do we need to do to get to help you get better. But as long as we act as though there's no problem, there's no issue, she's going to be fine, she'll have many other babies, and da 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 da, then we're not dealing with the issue that needs to be dealt with. We're not facing the truth of the matter. And
Totally.
people, you know, unfortunately, I mean, Kenya also has a very high infant and maternal mortality rate, very high. You know, and we're working day and night towards bringing those numbers down. But the reality is that loss is always going to be a part of us, whether we're in Kenya or we're in North America or in Asia. Loss is a part of us, loss is with us. So what happens when it does come? How do we deal with it when it does come? I think is so important to just be for people to know that it's okay. And you know, sharing my story has not been easy, Tara, because
Yeah.
you also face a lot of resistance. You have people who will try to silence you because they're like, "Why are you talking about that stuff?" And they're very bold when they ask you about it. Why are you talking about that stuff? You know, you're bringing a bad omens on yourself, talking about the dead, etc. And I'm like, well, I'm talking about him because he's my child, and this is my journey,
Totally.
and this is my story.
Totally.
And I decide what to do with my story. But it's we still have a whiles to go as far as normalizing this conversation. Yeah.
You've done amazing with being bold and courageous in your story. You
Thank
alluded
you.
you alluded a lot to kind of what's happening in Kenya with maternal, mortality and infant mortality. And I noticed that you have been such a powerful advocate for maternal health across the continent. You just came back from Rwanda, where there was a conference there, and you were
Yeah.
addressing some things on, maternal health. Can you tell us a little bit more
Mhm.
about that and what you think needs to be done urgently to make sure that women are not dying, bringing life into the world?
Thank you, Tara. So, you know, when I started to just dig deeper into the numbers, what's happening on the ground, because even the numbers that we get are not the full or rather the real number, because these are the ones that have been accounted for, that have been registered, written down. The numbers are
Mm,
much bigger on the
bigger.
ground. Women in
Yes.
the village,
Yes.
you know, so the numbers are much higher.
That's
And
right.
I was told that I came to learn rather that most women in Kenya who are dying during childbirth die of preventable situations. The
Yes.
highest one being postpartum hemorrhage.
Hemorrhage.
And I said, okay, so if it's preventable, why are the numbers still so high? What's not happening? So, you know, it's first of all, there's a lot of blame game that goes on in the health space, because really, if you're saying that it's preventable and women are still dying, it means that there's negligence somewhere, there's something that's not being done, there's something that where there's a place where our healthcare system is failing the women. So you know, I was last year I was shown the postpartum hemorrhage drape that was invented by a professor in Nigeria. And basically it's a very simple drape when you see it, and basically every woman who's going in to deliver just has it under her, and as they're going through, whether it's a c-section or a vaginal birth, they're able to measure how much blood she's losing, because usually they just measure by looking at it, you know, like,
Yeah.
oh my god, she's lost a lot of blood. How do you know that it's a lot of blood just by looking? How
Yeah.
much blood is that? Can you tell
Yeah.
me how many, you know, is it a liter, is it so this drape basically is able to, as they're helping the woman deliver. They're able to know, oh, this woman she's now getting to like a danger zone, she's losing too much blood. And it has been so effective. But the thing is, a lot of places, even in Kenya, have not embraced it yet, right? And people don't want to be asked questions. One of the leading doctors who's been championing this drape, he made a call to lots, many of the hospitals in Kenya. And the minute you ask them, hey, have you guys started implementing this? Nobody wants to answer your questions. Nobody wants to be held accountable for anything. So it's so infuriating for me, because it just needs people, honestly, it just needs people to actually care about the lives of women, to be able
Yes.
to
Yeah.
take some of those things and make
Yeah.
it a part of what they do, a mandatory part of what they do. um there's challenges of, women who are living in the very remote areas. By the time they get to a hospital, many of them will lose their babies on the way. Or you get to that hospital that's far away, and either it has no doctors, or there's no medication. It's one thing or another. And sometimes I'm honestly like, where do we begin? But when I went when I was in Rwanda the other day, and just hearing what other African countries are dealing with, I realized we are all suffering from the same disease,
That's right.
and that problem, it's like a pandemic around the continent, where we haven't yet prioritized the lives of women and
Yes.
children.
Yes.
They are not a priority yet, because if they were, it would show. Many of the babies who die of reasons that could have been prevented,
Prevented.
either by a
Absolutely.
simple scan, or
Yeah.
it's things that could have been caught early. But even the lack of education, there are many women who don't even know, Tara, that they should go for their clinic, ANC,
Yeah.
their prenatal clinic.
Antenatal.
They have no
Yeah.
idea. Antenatal,
Yeah.
nobody has ever told them, so they just go through pregnancy like they're just winging it. And then, you get in trouble at the end, and whatever could have been caught at a good time,
Much
simply
earlier.
if you had just gone and, for your clinic. So, I mean, it's so many reasons. But I think it all boils down to, if our leadership decided that the women of Kenya, the women of Africa, the children of Africa are
Are
important, they value,
important.
they matter, things would work. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Understanding that women are the fabric of society and it's not
Yeah.
disposable, and understanding how much this issue actually affects the family structure. Like, God forbid, but imagine if you had passed away, what would happen
Yeah.
to Nathaniel, your little
Exactly.
boy? And,
Yeah.
if you and Malachi had both kind of, passed on, like, what would happen to him, and what's the impact on him? And so prioritizing that life of women, and
Yes.
prioritizing the life of, understanding that they are the fabric of society, and that the impact that that has on the next generation that's growing up, so important. And I think what you said about the blame game, I
Mm,
people don't want to be blamed, or they don't want to take responsibility, or they're like, oh, it's not my problem. And so you're working hard to try and solve an issue, but nobody wants to be seen as the person who contributed to it. And it's like, no, this is actually not about you. This is the
it's
life of a
not.
woman. Yeah, this is the life of a woman, a child, a family. And also the importance is, sometimes I find there's less of an importance, and this happens in the West too, less of an importance
Mm,
placed on the life of a woman whose socioeconomic status is lower,
right.
because it's
Yes.
almost like, well, her life is not as valuable, which
Yes.
um which is very tragic,
Very
because a
sad.
life is a life, a life is a life. And
Absolutely.
so it's
Yeah.
important that we fight for that. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
one question, I think everybody can relate to this. I've gone through hard things in life that has really shaken my faith. I've questioned, God, are you there? Do you love me? Are you real? Like, if you are
Yeah.
real and if you are God, then why am I
Yeah.
going through this?
Yeah.
How was navigating this whole loss with your faith and your
Yeah.
relationship with God? What was that like?
So, I feel like my walk with God has been, I'll tell you, let me take you back to many years ago. I had gone through, it was like my first heartbreak. And I remember very clearly going to see my pastor at the time. And, he asked me, Kambua, so you're going through this, your heart is so broken. Where do you think God is? And I was like, he's so far, he's just so far away from me. And he was like, so do you think that he moved far away from you, or did you move away from him? And I couldn't
Mm,
answer that question because, and
yeah,
the point was God doesn't move away from us. If
yes,
anything, he's even
never.
closer to us. We
Yeah,
are the ones who move away.
that's right.
And it just shifted my perspective on hard times and where God is. So I remember at this point where I was losing or I had lost my son, and I kept saying, God, you're like I was holding on to God with everything, because I said, God, if you don't hold me, I will fall apart. Like you are all I have. You're all I can hold on to.
Mm,
Um and I think that my grieving period allowed me to experience a side of God that I hadn't fully experienced. I might have experienced it to some extent when I was, grieving the loss of my father a few years before that. But I really got to see the magnitude of God's love, God's grace,
mm,
God's mercy, because I literally could not pull myself off of the bed, I couldn't get myself up in the morning. I couldn't function. I couldn't do the things that come naturally to me. But he lifted me. I had mornings when I would wake up, Tara, and I would tell my husband, I feel like there's a pile of rocks on my heart. I couldn't get
mm,
up off of the bed. It was a heaviness that I have never experienced. And I'll just lay there, and it was those mornings that, because then I remember my husband saying, this is when we get to know that his mercies are new every morning, because somehow he would just breathe life into me, and I'd find the strength to get up, for that day. And it was really a day by day, moment by moment process where, can I get past this morning? Can I get past the afternoon? Can I get past the evening? Can I fall asleep? And I, you know, looking back, I don't know how people go through traumatic things without God, because sometimes the pain is so much, and you, as human beings, we will turn to something. You have to turn to
yes,
something to
yeah,
relieve that pain.
yeah.
And for me, what I turned to was God, and I'm grateful that I had God and that I know God. Did I have questions? Oh yeah, so many. But I knew that somehow he will figure it out. I had comfort in knowing that God will help me figure it out day by
Right.
day. Because I thought to myself, if God was not in the equation, I would have turned to anything else. And people turn to all sorts of things, all sorts of addictions, whether it's, substance abuse, whether it's sex, whether it's like you turn to something to numb
Something.
the pain.
Yeah.
Something has to numb the pain. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's I had to turn, it was my faith. I turned to God to take that pain. And he did. He took that pain. And as you know, grief is, I cannot say, even as I speak to you, I cannot say, oh, now I'm fully healed. Hallelujah. Praise God. For me,
Yeah.
it's been a day by day process of healing and navigating, and days of having triggers, and it's a process, because healing is not linear. But trusting that if God really picked me up off of that very painful place,
Yeah.
then there's grace for me every other day that
Every other day.
comes.
That's right.
So, and I say this for, it's not just for grief, it's for everything that we go through. It's knowing that God is really who he says he is. And
Mhm.
I feel like it's in the hard times that we really get to see the magnitude of who he
Yes.
is. That when he
Yeah.
says he's a comforter, that's who he is. When he says he's our strength in weakness, that's who he is. When he says he's the light in darkness, that's exactly who he is. So that's what I would say about
Yeah.
that.
I think
Yeah.
what you mentioned is very profound, in that we all turn to something, and it's choosing to turn to God in those moments, as opposed to, because you're going to turn to something else, whether it's like an addiction to shopping or an addiction to TV, to numb that pain. And so it's choosing to turn to God. That's powerful. Yeah. So my last question. So there are women listening right now who are grieving in
Yes.
silence. Maybe they haven't
Yeah.
told anybody, maybe they feel invisible. What would you say to that mama who feels
Yeah.
unseen or unheard or even not sure if healing is even possible?
I would say to that mama, first of all, I am so, so sorry for your loss. I
Hmm.
am so sorry for your loss. Deeply, deeply sorry. And I send you all the love I can master in my heart. I also want to say to you that you are seen, you are loved, you matter, your pain is valid. And I want to say to that mama, it's okay to sit in that pain, to feel it, allow yourself to grieve, because grief is our expression of love, of having loved. Allow yourself to grieve and don't let people put a timeline on your grief or how you should grieve. Um, and I also want to tell you that there are better days ahead, that you will actually laugh again. Also, to say that grief and joy can coexist. And that's what I'm living, that there are days when grief is still a big part of my life, but I'm still I find joy, I have peace, that they can all coexist. I want to tell you that you will wake up and the tears will not be falling as freely as they're falling right now. You will wake up and you will smile. I had a grief therapist when I was freshly introduced to grief, to the loss of my son. I had a grief therapist, and I remember her telling me to build a bridge between what for me had been a traumatic memory of my son. She encouraged me to reconstruct my bridge. So let me explain that. Every time she would ask me about Malachi, I would break down and she would ask, "What do you remember?" And all I'd remember was the hospital, and he struggled and he fought, and this is what happened, and the
Mm,
resuscitation and all of that. And it would completely wreck me. And she said, "Okay, I want you to tell me, where do you think Malachi is right now?" And I said, "I think he's in heaven with Jesus. What do you think he's doing right now?" I said, "I think he's probably coming from heaven daycare, and the angels are taking care of him or changing his diaper or whatever." And I started to laugh about it. And she said, "You see, your emotion, your feeling, your emotions just shifted from the place where when I asked you about him, you were crying, and now you're telling me about daycare and nappies and blah, 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 and you're laughing." And she said,
mm,
"That's the bridge that I want you to strengthen, is to know that, because we know that there's life after death, you know? So
mm.
imagining where your loved one is, that they are happy, that they are at peace. If it's your child, if it's been 2 years, 3 years, can you imagine how they look like? What would a 3-year-old be doing right now? Building a bridge that brings you peace, that brings you joy, is a way to cope with a loss.
Mhm.
But to say to you, Mama, it's going to be okay. I promise you, it's going to be okay. There are mamas all over the world like me. I'm in Kenya, and letting you know that it's going to be okay, and you are loved, you are seen, and you're valuable, and you're enough.
That is so powerful, Kambua. Thank you. Thank you so much. Your story is so powerful, and because you use your platform for good, for healing of other women, and just to
Yeah.
even spread the light, on not just what happened to you, but what is happening around
Yeah.
the continent to other women. It's such a powerful
Mm.
story. So I really admire you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tara. As you
Yeah.
can tell, the sun has set, so
Yeah,
I'm
I
in
can see
darkness,
the
and I was like,
equator,
I
the
can't go
African sun
switch
is
on the
setting.
light.
It's morning here in Calgary, and I can see the beautiful. I was thinking about that because I do miss that. I love the equator, like the consistency of the sun setting at
Yeah.
6
I
p.m. or
know.
6:30 whenever I'm in Sierra
Yes.
Leone. So I can see that the sun is
Yes.
slowly going down and then it keeps starting. But it's consistent. Now we're, we're now we're in in North America, where in the summer the
Yes.
sun doesn't go down until it's like 10 p.m. at night.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I remember
Yeah.
how strange that was for me when I lived in North
When you
America. I'm
first
like,
went there.
why? Yeah. Like, why is the sun out? It's like bedtime.
This episode is brought to you and sponsored by Wealth Genius. Wealth Genius is a wonderful partner of Freedom Tree, and when you support them, you support Freedom Tree. And if you'd like to sponsor an episode on our podcast on Radiant Living, you are welcome to do so. Just reach out to me. Now let's hear a little bit of a message from Wealth Genius and what they're all about. Have you ever wanted to invest in multifamily real estate but you don't know how? Well, that's where Wealth Genius comes in. It offers a very comprehensive education in real estate investing, covering a wide range of topics including multifamily, US and Canadian investing, and of course land development. Let's hear some more.
Thank you, Alfonso, for building this family. I feel like, reborn to this new family, and thank you for creating this.
You are the one person that changed our life, and I'm really grateful for that because you gave us our time back.
Everything that you're doing for the world, the community, I am so inspired by you every day.
We're being mentored by an individual who is not only an expert in real estate investing and an expert in apartment buildings and multifamily, but it's his mindset as well, of expansion and growth and that anything is possible.
This guy is amazing human. Alfonso is not human. I feel he's not human. It's sexy!
So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, join today. Not only will you get a one-on-one coach to support you on your real estate journey so that you know what to do, what not to do, and avoid very costly mistakes, you will also enjoy limitless networking opportunities with the vibrant real estate community. So what are you waiting for? Join Wealth Genius. Again, when you support them, you support Freedom Tree. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Back to our podcast.